All right. Hey, everybody. This is Beri, co-founder and CEO at IVY. I'm incredibly excited for our conversation today with Lori Gottlieb. Lori, hello. How are you?
Hi, good. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure to have you here. I genuinely believe that this conversation will be life-changing for everybody who dials in. I've been looking forward to it for many weeks. And before we dive in, I want to give everybody a little bit of background on Lori. So she is the author of The Atlantic's weekly Dear Therapist advice column. And she recently published a New York Times bestselling book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for 16 weeks consecutively. And the book is also getting adapted into a TV series featuring Eva Longoria. So we're here to learn a lot about what are the key life lessons we can all learn from Lori's experience with both being a psychotherapist herself, but as well as writing for this column, as well as writing this book. What are the key life lessons that we can all learn from therapy? So Lori, to kick us off, I'd love to hear from you. What got you into this field in the first place? So what was it like growing up? What kind of pulled you into this direction? And what ultimately led you to writing this most recent book of yours?
That's such a great question. I wish I could give you a really linear answer. I wasn't one of these people who said, when I grow up, I want to be a therapist. I was always really interested in story. And when I graduated from college, I worked in the entertainment business. I was a film executive, and then I moved over to network television. I was a junior executive at NBC the years that ER and Friends premiered. So it was a good year. And when I was working on ER, I loved being in the ER with our consultant, and it made me want to go to medical school. So I went up to Stanford for medical school. When I was there, I realized that managed care wasn't going to be the kind of thing that I wanted to do in terms of really delving into the human condition and story the way I like to. So I became a journalist. And I was a journalist I still am a journalist, but it was about 10 years into my journalism career when I had a baby, and I realized that I needed adults to talk to during the day. And the UPS guy would come with all these deliveries, and I would be like, how about those diapers? What's your story? And he would kind of back away to his big brown truck. So I called up the dean at Stanford and said, maybe I should come back to medical school. And she said, I don't think you want to do psychiatry. I think you want to do psychotherapy. You should get a graduate degree in clinical psych. And that's what I did. And so that is the very long, circuitous path that I took to becoming a therapist.
Got it. And then what led you to ultimately write for The Atlantic and then get this book published? What were the key goals that you had on those paths?
Yeah. So, I'd been writing, as I said, I was a journalist for a long time, and I always wrote stories about, I think, really the human condition. What's going on in the culture, and what are we not seeing about this moment in the culture? Those are the kinds of things I would write about. Of course, in my column, I tackle people's questions, and my inbox is kind of like it's like a stew of our, collective anxieties. But with the book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to bring people into the therapy room so they could see what I get to see every day. It's very different from like the social media version of life, obviously. But I think it's so much more interesting. And I also think it normalizes what each of us is going through. Because I don't think we get to see this part of everybody else's lives. And so I follow, and maybe you should talk to someone, I follow 4 different patients, people who are like completely different from each other. And then there's a 5th patient in the book. And the 5th patient is me as I go through something in my own life and I go see a therapist. So it's me as patient and it's me as clinician.
Okay, I love that. So at IVY, on our side, we're all about bringing people together for lifelong learning and community. So we're constantly looking to learn about the world and ourselves, and then we're surrounding ourselves with other passionate individuals who want to make an impact and who can be there for us in our good times and in our challenging times. And that, at its best, that's what community is all about. And throughout the past few years, we've brought together thousands and thousands of people. And recently we started hosting these leadership circles that I told you about, where our members have been sharing in very intimate, confidential settings, their highest highs and lowest lows. And what I've noticed is so much of our highs and lows are tied to each other. And no matter who we are, our age, occupation, where we're from, where we're going, we have so many things in common. There's these truly universal struggles and opportunities that we all face. So that's just based on my, kind of short experience with Ivy. On your side, you've been doing this for years and had this experience with not just everybody that you do therapy with, but also everybody that writes into the Atlantic, and also your experience of writing this book. I'd love to get your thoughts on what, if you had to give like a list of the key universal themes that most people are struggling with, what would you say that they are? And then after you've given us that, kind of overview list, would love to go and take them in turn to really learn how we can better navigate our lives based on the lessons you've learned of people dealing with those challenges.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I wrote the book was because I wanted to show that exactly what you just said, that we are more the same than we are different. That even no matter what we look like on the outside in terms of what our lives look like, how old we are, what our backgrounds are, whatever, we're ultimately, I think at our core, more the same. And so I think some of the themes that I see are a lot of people struggle with these stories that they tell themselves about who they are and the people around them that hold them back. There's this sort of faulty narrative that's like running in the background that they're not even aware of. And that tends to get in their way. I see that a lot. I see people struggle with change. I see people struggle with wanting to change, wanting to do something, and then somehow not being able to quite do it in the way that they want. I see people struggle with connection. I think we're all so busy and we're surrounded by so many people, but I'm talking about enriching connection, deeper connection, connection that I think helps us in terms of our balance in life. And of course, balance is another issue. Connection is part of it, but there are other parts of balance that I think people struggle with a lot. And I think probably the last big universal is how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, and what are some of these relational patterns, professionally and personally, that tend to get in our way.
All right, great. So those are 5 key areas. And despite the very limited time that we have together, I really want to make sure that we all get the benefit of the key things that you've learned on each one of these. So let's take them in turn. Let's start with the stories that hold us back. You mentioned to me also earlier that you're going to be doing a TED Talk on this in a few weeks. So very excited to see that when it comes out. Tell us a little about, what are the stories that hold us back? What are the constant trends that you see with people that causes this? And most importantly, how do we overcome the stories that hold us back?
Well, yeah, you'll have to go to the TED Talk for that. But I think, at the most basic level, we all walk around with these stories, right? And we're not the most reliable narrator sometimes, because we're all telling a story through our own lens. And sometimes we don't see other versions of the story. So we walk around with these stories like, these themes, like there's no way out of this, like freedom is a big thing, we think we have so much freedom in our lives, except when it comes to the problem at hand, in which case we have none. And we feel trapped. And it's usually because there's a story we're telling ourselves about our situation that is keeping us stuck. And then there's the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, like everyone's life is better than mine, or I'm an imposter, or I can't trust anyone, or I'm unlovable, or nothing will ever work out for me. Whatever these sort of stories we have about ourselves. And I think so much of the time we talk about kind of getting to know ourselves, but part of getting to know yourself is to unknow yourself, to let go of that version of the story that you've been telling yourself about who you are, so you can live your life and not the story you've been telling yourself about your life. And I think that sometimes we say to people, you might want to go to therapy. And I'm not proselytizing, for people to go to therapy, but I think that's how we kind of untangle some of these ways of thinking that are kind of running the show and we don't even realize it.
Got it. So like you said, I mean, therapy can be a powerful tool for dealing with this. Any other kind of like practical tools? So let's say everybody who's watching this, they'll have their busy day today and then, go to sleep, wake up tomorrow. What would you recommend that they do differently when it comes to, dealing with the stories we tell ourselves that maybe cause us to think we don't have the freedom that we have, or, how we're imposters or not living our best life?
I think it helps to notice those thoughts as they come in, because we don't even know they're there. I once had somebody that I was seeing for therapy write down everything she said to herself over the course of 3 days. And she came back the next week and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "I am such a bully to myself. I can't even read these out loud. Like, it's so embarrassing." But she did read them out loud. She didn't even realize she was talking to herself that way. We talk to ourselves more than we will talk to anybody else in the course of our lives. And it's so important to notice, what are we saying to ourselves? Are we saying things that are helpful? Are we saying things that are true? Are we saying things that are compassionate? Sometimes people think that they have to be not very compassionate to themselves, that they have to be like, kind of like a taskmaster in order to get things done. But that actually doesn't help you get things done. Being compassionate and also holding yourself accountable at the same time is going to be much more helpful.
And what are your thoughts as far as different tools such as, let's say, meditation, or any kind of books or resources you recommend that help people to take action against this, or, in a practical way? So recognizing, like, I think it's a powerful exercise, what you said, write down what you're saying to yourself to realize, be more compassionate. Anything else that's kind of like an ongoing daily practice someone could implement to overcome?
I think once people write it down, they start to notice it more. And so they can hear the voice before it starts interrupting whatever they're doing. It's really about noticing, what's your relationship like with yourself? How do you talk to yourself? Would you ever say that to a friend? You never would, by the way. So do you talk to yourself in a way that you would be helpful to a friend? If you're not being helpful to yourself that way, you might want to adjust the way that you're trying to have a conversation with yourself.
Got that. Got it. Thank you so much. That's very, very helpful. So moving to the second universal theme area that you mentioned, which is around people's deep desire for change, yet also huge resistance to change at the same time. What have you observed, and what have you found to be some effective ways of dealing with it?
Change is really hard because I think a lot of us don't realize that change and loss are sort of tied together. If we change, even in a positive way, we have to give up something that's really familiar to us. And we don't like to give up things that are familiar, because then we have to go into this place of uncertainty, this place of, we don't know what this new thing's going to be. We already know what the present is. Even if the present is, miserable or, unpleasant or something we want to change, at least it's familiar to us. But to go into something new causes a lot of anxiety for people. And, I think that taking that step into the unknown is really important, and they need a lot of support around it. There's a woman that I write about in the book who's in her 20s, and she keeps like hooking up with the wrong guys. And every time she meets someone, I can see from 10 miles away that guy's going to be exactly like every other guy that she's dated. But she can't see that because she keeps clinging to the familiar, something that feels really familiar to her. At one point, she even starts dating somebody from the waiting room, and she's like, well, at least he's in therapy. Yeah, but he's like bad news. So it takes her saying, I'm going to have to give up something that feels really comfortable to me, even though it's creating a lot of problems in my life. And I'm going to have to do something new, even though it makes me really anxious to do something where I don't know what the outcome's going to be. And so a lot of the times we have to be able to take that risk and to say, I'm giving up something that feels familiar because it's going to lead me in a better direction.
And what's the kind of thing that causes, so I guess, it's intuitive to understand how change equals loss, discomfort, it's difficult for many reasons. But also the desire for change is very, very strong. So what is the way to, what's the most common pitfall that's keeps tripping people up? And what's the best way to avoid that pitfall or similar pitfalls to that?
The most common pitfall is that people say, I want to change, but what they really mean is I want someone else or something else to change. So, it's like, I want to change, but this other person has to change, or this other roadblock has to change. Like the thing out there, this external thing has to change. When really the only thing that you can change is yourself, is what you're doing. So even though, yes, there might be a difficult person involved, or there might be a roadblock, some external situation that's involved, only you can do something differently. And once you realize that, then all these other possibilities open up. Oh, wait, I'm responsible for changing. What can I do? Even though these external things might be there, what can I do myself to make changes? And that gets people thinking very creatively about what they can do differently.
Yeah, I love that reframing. So, we think we want to change ourselves, but really we're thinking about how we want everything else to change.
Yep.
However, the only thing we control is really ourselves and our perspectives. And have you found any powerful tool for helping in addition to recognizing the problem and then reframing it in your own personal life, any other tools you've seen for managing change, like staying accountable? What are some things that people use to really help them through this journey?
Yeah. In the book, there's a chapter about change, and I write about the different stages of change. A lot of people think change is kind of like Nike, just do it. And it doesn't work that way. We actually do a lot of preparation before we're ready to change. And I write about those different stages in the book if people are curious, if they want a resource to kind of see how they could go through those stages.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori. So going to your next point, which is probably one of the, for everybody, but especially IVY members, of paramount importance, the importance of connectedness, and how we deal with, a very negative term is this loneliness, negative sounding term is loneliness, but also, how do we get these real deeper connections, and also how we balance it all together. So we'd love to hear, what are the trends you've been seeing and pitfalls, and what are the most powerful ways to get into a better track when it comes to this area of life?
I think that no matter what people are dealing with, I see people struggle with connection and balance. And these are people, by the way, who from the outside look like they're extremely connected. They have a lot of people in their lives. They're successful. They have, a professional group of colleagues. They have people in their personal lives, but they're moving so quickly that they don't actually connect face to face in a meaningful way with people. It could be months. When you think about what their days are like, they're not really listening to other people, or really being heard by other people, or just having some uninterrupted time where a phone isn't going, or something's not beeping or pinging or vibrating. They don't really have that. And I think people need to be really intentional about carving out that time. I think people feel like, I don't have the time for that. That's going to make me more stressed out. But actually, it's going to make you less stressed out, because you need to refresh in that way. And you need to look at, do I have too many people in my life? And so are there too many people, so I don't actually have any meaningful connections with anyone because I don't have time to do that.
Got it. And so once you know, again, that you have a problem where you might be actually someone with lots of friends and connections and colleagues and stuff going on, but it could be months between having any kind of a real deeper connection. What are some things that you found really help people? So I'm assuming some freedom from distractions, like the phone that keeps ringing all the time, is something you alluded to. But what else really helps people to intentionally create these deeper connections?
I think it's not just saying to yourself in a general way, I don't want to be distracted by my phone. It's saying, when I sit down to dinner, my phone is in the other room every time. right? They're just these ways that you can carve out places in your life where you can have connection, and it's built into your day or built into your week. Maybe it's on the weekends, but it's built into your lifestyle. So it's not just some, vague idea of I want to do this, but it's already built in, just the way you'd build anything else into your schedule.
Got it. And then let's say you are in a setting, I mean, other than the obvious, like, okay, the phone is really far away. What about in the process of conversation? Obviously, as a therapist, listening is super important, but also how you communicate. Any kind of tips that you could provide for leading to deeper connection in the interactions that you are already having?
Yeah, part of it is what you said, is that I think a lot of people, what we really want is to be understood. And that means that people need to really listen to us. So many times people will say, here's what you should do. Here's what I think about this. And sometimes we want advice like that. But often what we want is we want someone to just hear us. And we want to be heard too. And I mean, hear us, giving us their full attention. Again, not distracted by devices, and just listening without judgment, without criticism, and just understanding, being curious about another person. So many times we're thinking so much about ourselves and our agenda that we're not curious about what the other person is saying. And often what they're saying can spark some curiosity in ourselves and actually be helpful to us too. So that's part of it. Another part of it is when people want advice, like they're saying, hey, there's a situation, and they're telling you about it. This thing happened at work. This thing happened in my personal life. Often what we offer them is what's called idiot compassion. And idiot compassion is when you just kind of go along with their story because you don't want to kind of rock the boat. It's like, yeah, your coworker got that promotion. That sucks. But really, that the reason they didn't get that promotion and the reason it didn't happen in the last 2 jobs is because they actually don't put in the effort, or because they're very abrasive in meetings, or, whatever it is. Wise compassion is kind of like, if a fight breaks out in every bar you're going to, it might be you. If you see that happen with your friends, there's a way, again, with compassion, to kind of say, hey, I've noticed this thing happening. What do you think about this? That's being a really good friend. That person will trust you more. And you also are helping them to see something that they need to see to improve their lives.
Got it. I love that. I think what really struck me is that whole, like, if we could just remember that when someone is telling you something, they aren't like updating you because like you need to be updated, but rather they're looking to be understood. So anything that facilitates that process of being understood better, so curiosity, better listening, and then avoiding the trap of the, like you call the idiot compassion as opposed to wise compassion, really calling things out, but framing it, I guess, in a way where you're stating what you've noticed for the benefit, right? And you're pointing it out for the benefit of helping that person improve.
Yeah, we like to call them delivering compassionate truth bombs. But they're compassionate, it's very much like, hey, I've noticed, hey, I wonder, those kinds of things.
Love it. And a lot of times it's really your language, right? Like how you, in such sensitive times, it's really about like how you phrase or how you preface, what you're looking to share. So
exactly. It's how you say it. It's the tone in which you say it. It's the language with which you say it.
Got it. At the very end, I want to come back to this. Other kind of key lessons you've learned from therapy itself on how we can help others navigate their lives better. Going to your next point around balance. So balance, obviously, a part of it is very much around not having the right balance to have these deeper connections, which we just talked about. But balance in general, I think for a lot of people, they want to balance their professional career success with their personal life goals and fulfillment, with their health goals, with their family obligations, with their obligations to friends. And there's, again, only 24 hours in a day. And I haven't met too many people who are like, yep, I've got it. I'm super balanced. It's very, very hard. What have you seen as like really effective ways to combat like all the different demands on our time, and combat it in a way where like maybe it's never going to go away how much demands there is on our time, but how do we better navigate it? What's the best mindset to get into to feel like we're at least making progress towards having the balance that we're looking for?
This is going to sound really strange, but there's a woman in the book that I treat who is in her early 30s, and she gets a cancer diagnosis, and she really has to think about what's important to her in a way that she never did before. She was very successful. She, had just gotten married. She was professionally exactly where she wanted to be. And then this thing threw her for a loop. We shouldn't have to get a cancer diagnosis to think about what's important to us and how we're spending our time every single day. So many people think about later. Oh, I'll do it later. I'll take care of myself later. I'll get balance in my life later. And what happens is they're not living their life in a way that makes sense now. And what people find is that the more balance they have in their lives, the more they can achieve. And it sounds really counterintuitive because people think I need to move, go, 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 and then I will achieve more. Actually, the more balance that you have, the more focused you are on which goals are important, which goals are not so important. How are you wasting your time each day? How much time are you spending on Twitter? Really, I mean, these are the kinds of things people don't think about. We all have, life has 100% mortality rate. And I'll bet you guys are, wish I were your therapist right now. It's like, let's talk about death. But if you realize that you do have a limited time, if you kind of can keep death on one shoulder all the time, you will live your life so much more fully. You will accomplish so much more. You will have so much more balance in your life. Every day when you wake up, say, how do I want to spend this day knowing that I don't have an unlimited number of days? That is, it sounds really counterintuitive, but it really helps people to say, I need to do this today. I'm not gonna put this off. I'm not gonna put this off till later.
Got it. And in a recent conversation we had at Ivy with one of our other thought leaders, who's a very successful entrepreneur, I think a key realization he came to through actually working with a coach, what he shared was that, really thinking about, sources and uses of energy. And if you really need to get a ton done at work, just working harder and harder and harder, it doesn't really give you then the source of energy that you need to keep pushing. So this other areas of life can be that incredible source of energy, and being intentional about how we're getting those and working them into our schedule and eliminating other things in our schedule that
right.
take them away.
Yeah, we think that if we're doing more, that we're accomplishing more, but actually you're just burning yourself out. So it's like a battery, it needs to get recharged. And if you want to perform at your highest level, you need to recharge that battery.
Got it. Love that. Thank you so much, Lori. So before we open up to audience questions, because I'm getting a whole bunch on the chat window as well as in the Q&A window. So if everybody who's listening, if you have questions, there's a Q&A box in the middle bottom of your screen. Please type your questions there, and then I will tune you in to ask the questions directly. And those who type their questions in the chat window, I'll ask you as well. So thank you for everybody who submitted questions. My last question to Lori before we open it up to the audience questions. You have tremendous experience listening to a ton of people and being their therapist and really helping them navigate all of these challenges. And all of us, whether most of us are not trained in therapy or any kind of like a professional way of dealing with helping people face their issues. However, we all have a ton of people who depend on us, right? Whether it's our friends, significant others, family members, colleagues that come to us with challenges. Would love if you could summarize for us, from a lifetime in this field, what's the best way that we can be there for other people in their time of need when they bring us these challenges? You've already told us about the compassionate advice, sharing, being in a compassionate way, pointing things out. But what else, when it comes to listening, and then when it comes to actually giving advice? And giving advice can be a very dangerous thing. So what's the best ways to listen and to also direct people in the right direction as something that we should all keep in mind?
Yeah, in terms of advice, a good thing to do is to always say, when someone's telling you their situation, you want to find out why they're telling you. Do they just want to tell you because they want to, be heard and understood, and kind of process it for themselves? or do they want your advice? And you can say like, hey, that sounds like a really tough situation. Are you interested in how I think about it? Are you interested in my thoughts? And they can say no, or they can say yes, right? As opposed to just, here's what you should do. And again, having a lot of compassion, it's so much easier to see something when you're not living that person's life from the vantage point of being outside that person's life. So it might be very obvious to you what the problem is or what they should do, but remember that when we're in our own situation, sometimes it's hard for us to see. So just having compassion for that. I think that the best thing we can do for people that we care about is to give them our presence. And by presence, I don't mean that you have to spend a lot of time, because everybody's time is limited, but you have to spend time where you're actually there. You're in the room with them. You're in that energy field with them. It's funny because a lot of patients, they want to Skype with me, if they can't make it to a session, they want to Skype with me. And one of my colleagues says about Skype that Skype is like doing therapy with a condom on, that it doesn't feel like what it feels like, the energy in the room. And so, I think giving people presence, like being in the room with someone and not looking around or looking at your cell phone or like wondering, when you can leave, but just knowing that I'm going to spend 15 minutes with this person, and that 15 minutes is going to be dedicated just to our time together. That's the best gift you can give anybody in your life that you care about.
I love that. So really figuring out why they're telling you this stuff to determine whether, they want your advice. Having compassion, because what's obvious to you is totally not necessarily obvious to them because they're in their own head, and giving your presence. You mentioned a few kind of phrases, right? I noticed and so on. Any other, I don't want to call these word tricks, but like what other like phrases or way of, I guess, like spinning your comments so that like, people are as receptive as possible and that your compassion shines through. So what are kind of some phrases to really kind of double down on when someone is going through challenges? And what are some phrases to really avoid at all costs, because like it just tends to evoke a really negative reaction in people when they're being vulnerable with you?
Mm-hmm. To avoid at all costs is you should. Nobody wants to be told what to do in that way. People like to come up with their own ways out of things. And I think most people really do know what to do. They just need someone to kind of guide them in that direction. So you might say to somebody, have you thought about it this way? Or have you considered this? Or even ask them, well, how do you think about this? Or what do you think about this? Or what do you think is going on here? Is a good question. What do you think might be going on here? What do you think might be going on with the other people you're talking about? How do you think they might be thinking about this situation? How might they see it? Is there another way to look at this? And ask them those questions. Don't give them the other way to look at it. Like ask them those questions. That will start them thinking about things in a different way that's very non-threatening.
So being more Socratic about it, really helping them figure out what they already know by almost like leading them into the answers that they already hold by asking the right questions.
Yeah. And also, at the same time saying, I know this is really hard, because you do know it's really hard. This isn't a bromide. It's, it is really hard. We all go through things where we can't see something clearly. I know this is really hard, or I know that's really upsetting, or wow, that's really frustrating. Just knowing I see you, I hear you, that will like lower their defenses so they can hear these other questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And one other thing that you had mentioned before we go to the audience questions, it was this, and it really kind of was a great segue from what you just shared, is how we relate to other people in general. So with all of these kind of pearls of wisdom in mind, when it comes to both our personal relationships and our professional relationships, how we relate to others, in addition to being great listeners and being compassionate in our approach and helping them navigate, any other kind of key themes you're seeing these days, whether it's in people's personal or professional ways that they relate with others? And what have you seen to be powerful tools in helping elevate the relationships you have with other people?
I think that we all have patterns, ways of relating that are, they're we see them in all different situations. They're not just how you are at work. They're not just how you are with your friends or your family or in your, romantic relationships. And sometimes we don't realize that we're doing something. We don't realize that we're being abrasive or we're, being avoidant of certain things. Like we get upset about things, but we don't tell people we're upset about them. And then we act out in different ways, our resentment. There's all kinds of ways that we relate. And I think when you start to notice that it's happening in all different areas of your life, that's when you can start to make those changes. That's when we usually say to people, maybe you should go to therapy, because that's going to be the best place for you to feel not judged, not criticized, but also to have a mirror held up to you so you can see yourself in a way that you don't ordinarily want to.
So recognizing the patterns that we may
Yeah.
not be recognizing, and then finding ways to break those patterns, getting a more objective perspective so that.
Right. And it's not just knowing what the patterns are. We always say insight is the booby prize of therapy, meaning you can have all the insight in the world, but if you don't actually make changes out in the world, the insight is useless. So if someone says, oh, now I understand why I keep having conflict with my coworker, and then they leave your session and then they come back the next week and they're like, yeah, I'm still having the conflict, because they didn't do anything different. You have to do something different. You have to use the insight and say, oh, now that I know this, what can I do differently?
Action orientation, making sure that whatever insights you're getting, whatever you're learning, translating that to a very specific thing that you're going to change.
Yeah, we always say in therapy that you have to be both vulnerable and accountable. You have to be vulnerable to be able to see yourself in a way that maybe feels uncomfortable, but then you have to be accountable and go do something with that information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori. This was fantastic so far. I'm going to do my best to get through all the audience questions that we have. Some really thoughtful, profound stuff here. I'm going to ask, first of all, let me just get, okay. So this is from an anonymous attendee, so I will ask on their behalf. Many friends have recommended trying a few therapists out. How do you know when you found the right one?
It's interesting because the most important factor in the success of someone's therapy is their relationship with their therapist. It actually matters more than the modality the person's using, their training, how many years they've done this, all of that matters, of course, but the relationship matters the most. So when you go for a first session, it's a consultation. You go and you see, what is it like to be in the room with this person? And when you leave, you can ask yourself two questions. One, did I feel understood? And two, did I like being in the room with this person? Like, how did it feel to be in the room with this person? And if you can say yes to both of those questions, then I would go back for a second session. Just because you go to a therapist doesn't mean you're signing up for therapy. It just means that you go for a session, you see how it goes. You say, yeah, I felt understood. I like being in the room with this person. This person, seems like I can easily talk to this person. They seem smart. And then you go back and then you see what happens. Therapy is a relationship, and you see how that relationship evolves.
Love that. Thank you, Lori. And here's a related question from another attendee who asked, how do you determine if you're avoiding cutting the umbilical cord from your therapist? Signs that you're not getting a benefit anymore from therapy, and just stay in it out of fear or to avoid change.
Mm-hmm. Bring that up with your therapist. So we have the worst business model ever, which is that from the minute you come in, our goal is to get you to leave. That's what we want to happen for you, so that you don't need to come to us anymore. You should be in your therapy always talking about your goals. What are we doing here? If someone comes in and they seem to just be sort of reporting the events of the week, I'm wondering, A, are they avoiding something deeper? Or B, are they done? It's like, is there nothing else to talk about at this point? And that gets talked about in the room. So if you feel like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, I don't know what my goals are anymore, I don't know what the purpose of being here is, say to your therapist, hey, I've been thinking about this. I come every week and I'm not really sure why I'm here at this point. Let's talk about that. And your therapist will be happy to talk about that with you. And if it's time to leave, they'll be happy to help you, figure out, well, maybe we should have a few more sessions and say goodbye and, what the transition will be like.
Got it. Thank you so much, Lori. We're going to go over to Melanie Kuta to ask her question directly. Melanie, if you want to unmute yourself and please ask, that would be great. You may still be muted.
I can't hear her.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read her question. I guess her mic is still muted. She asked, as a society and in our demographic, anxiety is rising. Any practical or specific tips for anxiety management?
I think everything we talked about today is applicable to this question of anxiety. Self-care, balance, how do we talk to ourselves? How do we prioritize the things that are important to us so that so that we're not spending time on things that we don't want to be spending time on? Connection for anxiety, really connecting with people, making sure that you're not just texting your friends, but that you're actually saying, hey, let's go grab lunch, let's go grab coffee, let's go take a walk, even better, get out and have connection at the same time. Those are all things that reduce anxiety.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lori. We're going to go to Dr. Ali Benazir.
Hey, Lori, how you doing?
Hi, I know Dr. Ali Benazir.
Yeah, how you doing, hon? Congrats
Good.
on the book, and I'm thrilled that it's going gangbusters. And I think you voiced so many of the modern maladies in this talk today that people really need to pay attention to. And my question to you is, what have you noticed that really works? What either a technique or a kind of therapy that you've seen get the best results for, say, personal change in your clients?
I think what really works is when people come to therapy and they're ready to do the work. So some people come to therapy and they think, I'm just going to talk about things and then I'm going to feel better. And that's not how it works. When you come to therapy, you have to do a lot of work. You have to experience discomfort. You have to really look at yourself, in ways that maybe out in the world you don't let people see you. You have to be honest. So many people come to therapy and I find out months later that there's something big that they haven't told me. In my book, I do that with my own therapist, by the way. So, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here too. It's natural that when we come to therapy, we want to present the side of ourselves that we present to the world, which is we want to be liked, we want to be respected, we want all of those things. But when you come to therapy, you're going to have to get a little bit naked emotionally. And that takes courage, and that takes motivation. And every time you come to therapy, you're going to have to do work, almost like going to physical therapy. So I think that it works really well for people who know what they're signing up for and are willing to put in the work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you so much, Lori, for the great answer. We're going to go next to Veronica, please. Veronica, we're ready for you.
Hi, doctor. How are you?
Hi there.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure.
My question goes back to something you said in the beginning, that the person that we talk to the most is ourselves. So how can a person start to change the inner dialogue that they have with themselves daily? I've read that there are people who keep gratitude journals. There are people who keep journals where they put all of their worries as a way of taking it out of their head and putting it somewhere that they can see it. How does somebody change the inner dialogue? How do you start working on it?
So it's like what I did with my patient, where I had her write down everything she said to herself. The first thing was, what is that inner dialogue? What does it sound like? It's like this radio station that's playing in the background that you don't even know is on. So once she knew what that was, then every time that radio station went on, she could change the station. She could turn it to a different station. She could say, yeah, that station is fake news. That station isn't real. It's like we become our own fake news broadcasters. And you have to question the validity of what those voices are saying to you. Is this true? Is this real? What's another possibility for this to look at the same situation? What's another way of narrating this situation? So it's really about noticing that radio station is on and then changing the station to something that's much more helpful, much more productive, and much more real than this kind of voice that's very distorted that might be going on in your head.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for the great question. Thank you, Lori. I've got another anonymous question here. So here it goes. One of the things I found most surprising about your book was how easily you could see through the lies of your patients, that the lies that your patients have told you right away in a lot of cases. I'm wondering if you can recommend the best way to approach a loved one when you know they're not telling you the whole story or not accepting a reality and you're concerned about them.
That's really hard because they're holding on to that story because it protects them. There's a reason that they have to cling to that story, and there's a reason that they're so afraid of seeing something different. And so again, I think using some of those techniques that we talked about earlier, which is, I know this is really hard, or I know this is really scary, or I really care about you, I really love you, and I see that sometimes I think this might be holding you back or getting in your way or causing you to suffer in a way that I don't want to see you suffer so much. That's just sort of opening, it's kind of planting seeds. I don't think people should expect that something's going to happen in 1 or 2 or 3 conversations. It's just keep planting the seeds. Like every time you see them suffer, wow, I noticed that you're suffering. Just even notice that for them. I noticed that you're suffering and I wish you didn't have to suffer so much. I think there might be other ways of doing things that, would help. And they'll be like, no, it's like this. Okay. And then you let it go. You have to kind of just plant those seeds and wait for something to blossom. You can also suggest that, it might be helpful to talk to someone about it. A lot of times people find that really pathologizing. Like, you should see a therapist, something's wrong with you. I wouldn't even say see a therapist. I would say, maybe you can talk to someone about it. Maybe there's a coach or someone else whose perspective you could get. And whatever they start out with, they might on their own start researching, oh, who can I talk to?
Got it. Thank you so much, Lori. That was great. I've got one more question that came up just now. Following up on one of the prior attendees' questions, is there a particular modality of therapy that Lori finds most effective, or does it just depend on the person?
I use a really eclectic approach. I use lots of different things with even the same person, but really it's about my connection with that person. If I can't connect with that person, nothing's going to get done. They're not going to change at all. We grow in connection with others. We change when we feel connected to someone else and we trust them. So the most important thing that I can do is I can be there in a way where they know that they can't BS me, but I also am very warm and kind and compassionate, and I'm not judging them. And that's what we can do in our own lives with people that we love too, is to have those dualities, is know that this person knows that you're not a pushover, that they know that you're going to tell them the truth and be honest with them, in the same way that kids don't want adults to kind of, they want to be held accountable. We all do, but we want to be held accountable in a way where we know that we're loved and valued and respected.
Thank you so much, Lori. Going to keep rolling with the questions. When you select a therapist for your child, let's say somebody between 13 to 16 years old, is it better to find someone of the same gender as the child, or is closer in age to the child, like a younger therapist, for example? Or does that not matter?
You want to give your child the most agency possible in choosing this therapist. So whatever you can leave up to the child, if it's not in your network or something like that, give them the choices that are in your network. But whatever you're willing to do in terms of, give them some choices. Say, I've researched these 3 people. What do you think about them? Just they can look them up. They're teenagers. They'll like Google them. Or say to them, do a little bit of research and see, is there someone that you think you want to go to? And let's see if it's someone who's in our network or someone that we can, afford. And then let them have as much control over that process of choosing who it is that they're going to go talk to every week. That will make their therapy go so much more smoothly.
Thank you so much, Lori. How do you reconcile distancing ourselves from toxic people and the suggestion, in quotes, you can't change anything externally, change yourself? So how do we reconcile these 2 things?
You can't change what those people are doing, but you can change your response to what they're doing. So you're probably engaged in some kind of what we call like a dance with that person. So every time they do that thing that really irritates you, you respond in a way that exacerbates the situation. You know, and you guys are like doing this dance, but once you change your dance moves, once you do something different, they either have to change their dance moves too, or they're going to fall flat on the floor. Either way, it doesn't really matter what happens with them. You're doing something different. So don't engage in the same pattern that's probably, you know the dialogue at this point. You could just like do the scene without it even happening because you've been through it so many times with them. You can't keep replaying that same scene. You have to do something different. The way you're responding is contributing to the interaction.
Thank you so much, Lori. Another child-related question. How do you handle the message to the child if they don't want therapy, but do you think they can benefit from it? And I guess zooming out, just from my side to add, just generally for everybody, you know, you already mentioned a little bit about maybe don't say therapist, but maybe see a coach or a professional. How else do you maybe communicate the value proposition? You know, for all of us to hear it, but also for all of us to, I guess, place it as an option to friends, colleagues, or children who may have a misperception about what therapy is.
Yeah. So it's tricky with children because often, you know, their world is about us, and it's also their friends and their school and all that, but it's also us. And so when they're told that maybe they should go to therapy, sometimes they feel like the problem is what's going on outside. And sometimes it is. You know, it's not one thing. And so one thing to say is, I see that you're struggling. Why don't we go see a therapist together and just see what's going on? Maybe I'm doing something that I don't know about. And then that relieves the child a lot. Like, oh, you know, then I can talk about some of these things that aren't working at home. And maybe what happens is, you know, and the therapist will know how to deal with this, by the way. Like maybe you come in as a family the first time, and then the therapist says, hey, you know what, I want to talk to each of you guys individually because then I can hear more about what's going on from each of your perspectives. And that creates so much freedom. It doesn't make the kid what we call the identified patient. It doesn't make the kid like you're the problem. And the kid then could talk about anything because the kid doesn't feel like, well, I'm the patient. It's like my parents are the problem, or my school is the problem, or this other thing is the problem. And then they can just talk about whatever they want. And they know that the therapist is their advocate and is on their side to help fix a situation that isn't working.
I love that. And just to round that out, Lori, whether it's your kid, but also whether it's a friend, a colleague, or also just for all of us to hear, if you had to really summarize it in like a quick minute, what would you say are like the reasons why everyone should potentially consider going to therapy? Like the key value proposition.
It's because we all have blind spots. Every single one of us has blind spots. And sometimes those blind spots, it's almost like we keep getting in the same situation over and over and, you know, falling on our face. And why do we keep doing that? We don't realize we're doing that. So I think one of the best benefits of therapy is that you can figure out what it is that is not working and why it's not working and how to change it. And I don't know any other environment that does that as well as therapy.
I love that. Thank you so much. One question on the topic, and then I want to wrap up with getting your thoughts on the book and next steps. For many IVY members, a lot of times it's not so much, you know, underperforming at something or really struggling with, you know, like the lack of an ability. It's much more sometimes also around being an extremely high performer, go-getter, you know, you do a lot. And that kind of like high need for achievement, high performance individuals, let's say these corporate executives, people running organizations, people self-actualizing, creating works of art and music and leading social impact projects, you know, all these people that we would look at from the outside and think, wow, this person's so impressive, you know, look at what they're doing. What are some challenges that are very actually specific to those people? I mean, of course, they might be shared by the wider population, but what are the constant trends you see in high achieving people? And what have you found to be most effective for those individuals to better navigate their lives?
One of the things that I think those kinds of people engage in a lot is comparison. And I think it's really toxic. They instead of just comparing yourself to yourself, where was I a year ago compared to where I am today? They compare themselves to so many other people. And sometimes comparison can be helpful. It's aspirational, right? I always say to people, follow your envy. It tells you what you want. Instead of just sitting there and stewing in the envy, figure out, well, oh, that means that I want that. I want that in my own life. And what steps can I take to get that instead of just, sitting here and feeling envious? Comparison is so toxic, though, when you don't use it in a healthy way like that, when you use it to devalue yourself, when you use it because you feel like, you're not good enough or you haven't achieved enough. And then you push yourself and push yourself and push yourself. But maybe you're pushing yourself in a direction that isn't really what your passion is. And it's not really aligned with your own goals for yourself and your life and what you want out of life. So I think that we have to remember that we're not living somebody else's life. We only get one life. It's our life. And we have to make intentional decisions about what we want our life to be. It doesn't matter what everybody else out there is doing.
So focus on yourself. Compare yourself to yourself and really focus on, with this one life that you get, how do you want to get the most out of it versus constantly comparing your life to other people who live a different life. So thank you so much for that. Last question to help us wrap up. You've been incredibly generous with your time and your thoughts and insights today. As I predicted at the beginning, I do believe that a lot of this will be life-changing for all of us. Would love to hear from you how our community can best support you. What we can also find in your book, how your book can help us better live our lives, what key learnings we can look forward to kind of like within the contents. And then finally, if there's any last piece of advice that you'd love to leave everybody here before we sign off, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I really wrote the book because I felt like it would provide people with the experience of, seeing those blind spots. It's so much easier to see yourself through other people's stories than if people say, oh yeah, you do that, you're like that. And so I think so far for readers, the experience of the book has been, it really helped me because I saw myself or I saw someone close to me in the stories of these other people. And a lot of what I do in the book is I explain what I'm doing as a therapist and why. And so I think that a lot of people can take those tools and either apply them to themselves or apply them to other people. I don't mean do therapy with other people, but that they can apply the knowledge gained to understand themselves better and to understand the people around them better.
Okay, I love that. Lori, thank you so much. This really means a lot. Everyone at Ivy, we're all here always to be there for each other, to support each other, and also, elevate our lives and make a bigger impact through the process. And the lessons you shared will play a key role in that. So thank you so much. Congratulations on the success of your book, and looking forward to supporting you in all the times to come.
Oh, thanks so much. It was such a great conversation.
Thank you, Lori. Take care. And thank you, everybody, for dialing in. All the best.